Hi, it's Lisa, and I'm here again to talk to you about another game sequel. Another second game, sort of, in a series that I believe to be superior both to the first game and the third game in the series. Yes, we're indulging in a bit of tomb raiding, with Crystal Dynamics' second entry in their second trilogy managing the franchise, Rise of the Tomb Raider. It's an interesting series overall, having now spanned multiple continuities, developers and publishers, and one which has been near and dear to my heart since Tomb Raider 2 in 1997. I remember well holding the boxed game in my hands and being excited. It was only the second game I owned in a box. The first had been Red Alert a year earlier, and having grown up in Russia, entirely dominated by a pirate market in the 90s, boxed games were rare, exciting, and exceedingly expensive. The original series, 6 main games in total, were developed by a UK studio called Core Design in Derby. Before it fell on hard times following ambitious but entirely unsuccessful and rough and ready Tomb Raider Angel of Darkness. They were acquired by Rebellion, but shut down entirely after a few years. The Tomb Raider franchise, however, had remained with publisher Eidos, who also owned such properties as Thief, Hitman, and Deus Ex. They found someone else to make more Tomb Raiders. Enter Crystal Dynamics, which had unbelievably been spun off from the 3DO company and had been both publisher and developer before being bought by Eidos. They worked on Tomb Raider Legend, which took the game into a much more action-heavy direction compared to Angel of Darkness. They followed it with Tomb Raider Anniversary, a thorough and loving remake of the first Tomb Raider, and concluded the trilogy with Tomb Raider Underworld, which will surely be the topic of another video at some point. In 2009, Square Enix bought Eidos, along with Crystal Dynamics and the Tomb Raider IP, as well as the Thief, Hitman, and Deus Ex IPs, and proceeded to have Crystal Dynamics reboot the franchise. Which is where we find ourselves here with young, hip, groovy, gritty Lara. In Tomb Raider 2013, we discovered Lara's first adventure, getting battered, stabbed, bruised, and otherwise hurt in her venture on a mysterious island, in what is, I would say, often a questionable fascination with seeing Lara hurt. The game was well received, and so Crystal Dynamics produced the sequel, Rise of the Tomb Raider. It's an extremely dumb name. And there are a lot of things which I think are rough or inelegant in this game, which in no way diminishes my love and appreciation for it. On this replay, I came to see things in pretty much the same way as my initial impression when I played 10 years ago. The failures dampened and the successes magnified. I missed jumps because of strange control and precision, sighed at the plain, po-faced story, and giggled at the unintentional comedy and the ludo-narrative dissonance. But none of these things even remotely diminished my complete and utter enjoyment of the game. Why? I must readily admit that many of these flaws are ones I would highlight in other games and cite as valid complaints about their quality and effect on how fun the game is. Yet, in the context of Rise, and what it does well, I find it distressingly, or pleasantly, easy to ignore such flaws. So, what is it that's so good about Rise of the Tomb Raider? First, the combat is extremely fun and satisfying. Lara is adept at committing war crimes, or at the very least excessive murder, but the combination of conventional guns and bows with improvised explosives and a variety of ammo makes for a varied experience. Evolving the basics of a sort of cover shooter, first seen in Tomb Raider 2013, you have the traditional choice of doing stealth kills or going in all guns blazing, or a mix of the two. The dynamic cover system is extremely fluid, and to this day, one of my favourite implementations in any game. Lara uses cover as and when needed and can fluidly move across the battlefield and react to the often equally mobile and aggressive enemies. Once alerted, they unleash a lot of gunfire, grenades, and will rush and flank you. There are many combats you can win by just hiding and popping out for shots, but a lot of the time that will just get you killed, so you have to disable enemies, either with improvised pipe bombs or Molotov cocktails. Later on, you unlock grenade arrows for your bow, a shotgun, and can even use skills to specialise into explosive booby traps if you're going more in the stealth direction. The game really wants you to have fun and blow everything up. The game really loves explosions and fire. The enemy variety also holds up fairly well, with mercenaries wielding different weapons, different levels of armour on head and body, and even shields, which require a lot of scarpering and, explosives to take it down. There are enemies that try and rush you for knife attacks, and you can execute timed dodges to avoid melee attacks and do counter kills too. Lara is absolutely brutal in strangling, axing, and cutting throats. Indeed, here as an aside, I will go into the brutality of the game, which escalates from the antics in Tomb Raider 2013, where a lot of hurt was visited on Lara. Though she dishes some back, it feels like for Rise, the developers opted to turn Lara's savagery up to 11. Stealth kills and finishes are brutal, zoomed in on by the game, and a great number of your attacks also lead to fiery deaths for the enemies. If Lara is affected by any of these horrors that she dishes out or sees, she shows no particular sign of it throughout the game. In fact, that this goes uncommented on by the game, I find really quite amusing. There is no concern for the moral consequences of absolutely murdering hundreds of mercenaries throughout the game in a variety of gruesome ways, and the excess is positively comical. I cannot for the life of me understand why developers Eidos Montreal, who took on the making of the third game in the trilogy, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, decided to tackle the topic of Lara's PTSD from all of the killing and her moral qualms about murdering humans. The boat had long sailed on Lara's psychopathy, and drawing attention to this in the third game is absolutely absurd. There are, without doubt, times and places to tackle that, and the violence we see in video games in general, something that a variety of developers have attempted to do with varied levels of success. See, for example, my video essay on Spec Ops: The Line for a game which addresses the topic effectively. This Tomb Raider trilogy was absolutely not one of those places, and Rise at least recognises that. So enjoy Lara being the Predator and don't think too hard about it. Mercenaries aren't the only things that you face, and in true Lara Croft fashion there are some different enemy types that mix up the challenge, and although nothing fundamentally changes about your arsenal, you find that you approach things a little bit differently. It's enough to keep the combat interesting throughout the whole game. The next crucial element is the exploration, which is again expanded from the previous game. Lara gets to visit 4 specific non-linear areas in this adventure. I hesitate to call any of this open world, as it's more akin to a limited area with freeform objectives and missions. The first area, being a tutorial, is very small, but the other 3 areas are fairly expansive and offer a variety of activities which you can engage in or ignore as your desire strikes you. Very little in these areas is required to actually progress the story, and is mostly there as a way to introduce you to what you could be enjoying in them, which is a variety of hunting around nooks for materials used in upgrading your equipment, artifact collectibles, challenges such as shooting down targets, cutting down flags, tossing chickens, that kind of thing, and some missions from your local allies which reward you with outfits and equipment to expand your arsenal. All of this is linked into the general traversal systems, which are typical to the Tomb Raider genre. Jumping across gaps, shimmying along ledges, sliding down zip lines, and eventually grappling to swing across large ravines, swimming underwater, that kind of thing. There is pleasing variety and progression, although I don't think that the platforming is something that Rise necessarily excels at. There are other games which do it better, such as the Prince of Persia series, and there are even Tomb Raider games that are a much more involved platforming experience, such as Crystal Dynamics' own Anniversary and Underworld. Equally, you have a pleasing progression of unlockable tools that will gain you access to areas for exploration, opening up previously closed paths and connecting different parts of the semi-open areas, often as you return to them after doing a more linear story segment. A small element that I found satisfying was that some of the blocked paths are dependent on using fire or explosive damage. And although you don't unlock weapon modifications capable of doing that until later in the game, there are world-spawning items such as petrol cans or the craftable Molotov cocktail that allows you to access these areas early. In general, the process of collecting and crafting things flows really pleasantly. To max everything out, you would certainly have to devote some very specific time to hunting animals, searching for caches, and so on. But generally, you pick a few things that take your fancy and work towards them quite gently. The challenges you can find in the different areas can be quite fun. Although I haven't done all of them, on this run I found myself engaging with a lot more of them than I expected. The particularly silly one, with finding chickens and returning them to a pen, felt like a satisfying nod to Zelda games as well. All of this collection is aided by optional skills, so if you do want to focus on collecting things, you can invest in improving your survival senses to find stuff. This does often lead you to using the survival sense to highlight stuff in the environment very frequently, but it feels like a reasonable compromise and I didn't find it too grating, to be honest. For whatever reason, the exploration and finding of stuff, whether artifacts with fully voiced appraisal from Lara or journals of various characters from the game, makes a really satisfying experience. I think at least part of that is the little ding you get for finding something, which I find sends off some sort of Pavlovian response within my brain. So much so that I felt it very keenly when I dived back into the game for this run almost a decade after I first played it. The game is also just gorgeous. On max settings with a modern PC, it is really beautiful. And the reveal of the third open area is extremely beautiful and touching, in particular as it comes in stark contrast to everywhere that you'd visited in the game up until that point. It's an unexpected and delightful environment to be thrown into halfway through the game. The final element is challenge tombs, which make a return from their fairly limited design in Tomb Raider 2013 to something a bit more robust and interesting here. There are 9 tombs overall, each centered around a particular puzzle or theme, using the traversal and exploration mechanics from the game in some combination to unlock a unique ability. These are not overly complex, although they are a step up from the Tomb Raider 2013 selection. It's not a dedicated puzzle game after all, but they are satisfying to puzzle over and solve, and involve a little bit of mental effort, knowing and understanding your toolset, and trying to read the area intention and design. They are each fun, deal with different mechanics, are visually interesting, and never outstay their welcome. You don't have to slave over them for ages, but they are typically multi-stage so as not to trivialise the process. The developers have also balanced the approach to Lara, hinting at solutions sufficiently well, which stands in stark contrast to how some puzzles have been handled by these kinds of games. Lara will never give you the solution outright, and at most hints towards the general direction of what you should be thinking about. She will supply a broad objective for the next part of the puzzle without spelling out how you actually achieve that. This is true for both challenge tombs, which are entirely optional, and other puzzles you have to solve in the course of the story progression. The story puzzles are generally far gentler than the challenge tombs, but are interesting enough as variations to your activities. Those are the good parts, but I suppose something has to be said about the story and the narrative. It's not bad. I would not characterise it as anything far beyond functional, however. There is a coherent and interesting enough story at its heart, and things for Lara to overcome, friends to make, and truths to be revealed. It's enough to hang the rest of the game on, but nothing that really drew me in. Even though I love some of the thematic ideas, they never really take off in a way that sold it to me. A quick note here as well on the Baba Yaga DLC, which was released a little bit after launch. I played it this time around, having not played it the decade previously, and it's extremely good. I had a lot of fun. It's basically another chunk of story with an associated area. You don't get the open world experience, but you do get challenges, you do get missions, you do get lots of stuff to do. It's really interesting visually. It's actually an interesting side story, and it's all handled really, really well with good puzzles and additions to the game. It also has a boss battle that I really liked and enjoyed, and harkens back sort of to some of those cool boss battles where you have to traverse the environment and get to the boss on multiple stages, such as you see indeed in Tomb Raider Underworld and Prince of Persia Forgotten Sands. I do recommend playing with it. So, what does that all combine into? Well, don't play this game for the story, and I think you will enjoy yourself. It's an excellent example of the genre and what a modern Tomb Raider game could be like. Tomb Raider 2013 felt like it was reaching for some of the ideas but not quite able to execute on such a satisfying vision of them, and Shadow of the Tomb Raider felt much too muddled and restrictive in comparison. Rise of the Tomb Raider may not be the perfect game, or even a great game, but it still stands out as one of my favourites. If you haven't given it a go, or were put off by the story, I would recommend going back and giving it another look. Hopefully the varied mechanics, satisfying combat, and interesting puzzles and explorations can give you a good and fun gaming experience. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.